Morning from Australia. Richard Miller, never not here. Welcome. The days roll by and I just feel open. I don't know, I got a real felt sense. And then I feel intellectual too. I feel like I'm learning a lot of things and I'm connecting with people that I would say they're centered, you know. They're somehow in that package, you know, or whatever it looks like, and it feels very comfortable. And so then this is what I'm sharing, you know. Some people have theories about Australia is different, or people are laid back, or however they explain it. And but certainly they're willing to speak with me. So today we're with Helio Matahari. So welcome.
Thank you, Richard.
So we live in a world of motion. You know, we're moving. Things around us are moving. You know, a lot of people explain the world as a vibration. So that's moving too. And yet when you think about all this, even a vibration, in a way, it begs time. And lately I've been thinking that time is just an earth phenomena. You know, I've said that a few times in our conversations, that if you were out in space, all you'd see would be stars, no matter which way you looked, and they wouldn't really change that much. Certainly you wouldn't have a 24-hour day, or you wouldn't have winter, spring, summer, fall, or, you know, we're on Earth and we're in the rhythm of this planet. And then motion, we're in a body that's in movement, and that body needs energy to sustain itself. And since the body makes the perceptions, we tend to say that everything we perceive is energy. Because, well, it's like if we don't plug in the radio station, we don't get any reception, right? So we need that energy. Of course, that's not a perfect metaphor, because we know radio waves are measurable and that they're in energy form, but, you know, we don't really know what a thought is, or what stillness is, or what awareness is. You know, we don't know if that's energy, but so many times we speak as if everything is energy, and that's the fundamental part of creation. How does that sit with you?
Well, it says many, many things, of course. Yeah. My interest has been around that whole understanding of energy being vibratory. And we do borrow each other's legends to create our own myths. And my myth is called spiral harmonics. And I've been on the quest for the essential dynamic of energy, consciousness, and love, and now power, because what I see is that in my observation of nature and energy dynamics and fluid dynamics and many dynamical processes, that they do have core archetypal patterns in them that morph into each other. And that's observable fact. It's not conjecture, it's not somebody's idea. And so that gives me a lot of peace and reward for my journey to keep going. To see that, you know, when you move your hand through the water, that creates this whirlpool, and that linear motion has an associated vortical spiral, hyperbolic spiral associated with it. And when you look at all linear movements, generally you see spiral movement associated with it, whether it's current in a wire creating a spiraling field, or whether it's water moving linearly and creating vortexes as it goes, or whether it's in consciousness, even setting your goals, that you have a linear progression, but they actually curve around the center of your perception and the center of your need.
Or the center of your belief structures, right?
The center of your belief structure.
Let's just stay a little bit with the foundation, because it was fascinating when you said I'm borrowing other people. We all borrow each other's myths, right? And so then myths, sometimes I think, a few days ago we were saying something like the perennial philosophical question is, when you see something, is it the self or is it the other? And I was saying, well, maybe you just see your myth, you know, and who knows what you see. You have the myth that there is another, or you have a myth that there's only self. But what can you say a little bit more about what are the options with myths? Is that too general, or?
For me, we have a very linear way of expressing ourselves. So we talk in a stream of words, a line of words for our comprehension, but a lot of our reality and our thinking is global and holistic and has many facets happening all at the same time. Like right now, I'm speaking to you and the camera and the audience, and that reverberates beyond this present moment. And the senses that are coming to me are the heat of my feet on the carpet now, and the heat of the room, and the fan going in the air, and the whole room. And this whole perception is affecting me. I can hear someone mowing, you know, in a lawn somewhere else. You know, it's not a siren in New York. I'm hearing someone mowing in a green hill valley in middle coast of Australia. This is affecting me right now. And all of that is impinging on my perception as well as you're looking at me. So we express ourselves in this focused linear way. But associated with all of that is all of these other sense perceptions and all of these other things going on at the same time. And same with the linear progression of our culture and our myths, that they're a linear expression, a historical progression. To make sense of them, they build on facts or myth from before, so that there's a linear progression for us to comprehend them. But the reality is a global, galactic, universal phenomenon that's unrolling at the same time. And we can't put that into a line, a linear stream, because that's not how it is. We perceive and try and understand it in our linearities. But the reality is that you and I are in an incredibly great universe that is all of these things at once.
So that's why they say that can't be communicated, because apparently our communication is made of verbal models, and the container of that verbal model just contains one at a time, and then it tries to relate them in a sequence, because then that's what we call logic, right? If we just started saying things left, right, and center, it wouldn't really tie together, and people say, where's this guy trying to go? Right?
Because we're trained to think linearly. We're trained to communicate linearly. We're schooled and conditioned to communicate in this linear fashion. Doesn't mean you can't create a global or matrix kind of communication, which is what poetry is a lot about.
Yeah, poets weave images that sometimes they shoot from left, right, and center, and
the rhythm and the matrix and the rhyme at the end and in the meter and everything, and they all have a matrices of meaning that capitulate at the end sometimes.
Sometimes and sometimes not, or it's variable.
Contrast.
But I love it you say matrix, you know, because that's more like what we were talking about here in the lawnmower, and feeling our bodies, and somehow we don't have a technology that can transmit matrices, or do we?
Oh, our brain is the archetypal global comprehension tool, where it's taking in all of these sensory things and making sense of them, and giving, and we are schooled to create a focus out of that and not pay attention to all of these things at once, when we can pay attention to many more things than just one thing. We can be aware of multiple things at once. And it's a very comical expression that people say multitasking, you know, that they can do more things at once. But we can actually, and we always do, a myriad of things at once, beyond our focus comprehension. You know, that's always going on. But I think one of the interesting things in my journey with understanding consciousness, if we go down that path, is to see that what reinforces a thought and what feels good and what builds upon history is what is a progression, and how does that add up? How does that hold its momentum in space as an act of consciousness or as an act of form? What holds something in its momentum in space? What keeps that thing in its form, or keeps it in the form of a dialogue? What perpetuates the dialogue? What is that spiritual essence, if you like, that keeps population after population interested in it. So there's something dynamical in that keeps...
Something's new, okay, and it leads somewhere, but I mean, in the end, it leads somewhere where we want to go, you know. It paints a rosy picture, like of a utopia, or getting along better with men, or men and women, or maybe of a more abundance on earth, or somehow more justice, or somehow stewardship of things that are around us instead of consumption and piles of junk. And if it doesn't end in something that we tend to already have a prejudgment on, which is our myth probably, if it doesn't end in that, then we probably feel bad, right? I mean, it's not all that interesting. It's a blue story, right? And then I've noticed really a lot that the feeling state is really engendered by a story, you know, either a story that we know, or somehow a story that's running underneath as one of the myths, probably, right? And I've asked a lot of people if there's just a plain feeling with no story attached, and I think people say there is, but I don't know. I don't know about that. I haven't really.
What comes to my mind when you're talking there, because of my myth and my history and my journey, is that to communicate a dynamical understanding of harmony, because my projection and what gets reinforced for me is that most of the religions and most of our journeys want a sense of peace and harmony or happiness as a goal. But what that feels like in the body is relaxation and a sense of centeredness, and that things are flowing, but there's not a resistance, because if you feel a resistance, you don't want to go there.
Flowing means a trust, right? Because we're willing to go where it goes.
But what I'm trying to do is relate dynamically the dynamics that we see around us in nature, in water flow, in biological geometry, in weather, in the galaxy, to our emotions and to our consciousness. And to me, that's really important, because our conscious attunement with nature allows us to feel that flow and harmony and so on. And if we're out of alignment, attunement with nature, then we don't feel that. And there's very good reason for that, of course, because if we're out of tune with the primal life force, which evidences itself in natural systems, then we're going to be in stress. We're going to be in a place where our energy isn't interacting harmoniously with the greater field. So in terms of consciousness, our minds tend to be pattern recognition tools, that they recognize patterns. They recognize, oh, every time I hit my head on the wall, it doesn't feel good. Every time I walk on sharp glass, it doesn't feel good. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to walk on soft earth, grass, carpet, things that feel good. I want to talk to people that feel good. That we're recognizing the recurring patterns that allow us to feel good, and in a very humble, basic, intrinsic way, instinctive and animalistic level of knowing, we're feeling a path of harmony all the time.
Yeah. Could you say that what we really recognize is contrast? Because if things don't change, or if, white writing on a white board, you need a blackboard, right? Somehow there's got to be a contrast.
Sure.
And so then the whole thing of good and evil and different motivations, we can notice those things. And if everyone just lived with all the same goals to their life, it wouldn't even show up on the radar, really. I mean, that would just be the way things are, and it wouldn't really be an alternate. You wouldn't think that you could do any different. And then you're saying, okay, well, out of that contrast, patterns are somehow comfortable. Now you can say patterns exist, or you could say that we just tend to reinforce patterns and try to build them and identify them. And then, maybe I don't know. In one way, you could say they already exist and they're out there. There's patterns, right? In another way, we're comfortable with patterns because we say, okay, well, things are predictable, and I'm safe in this pattern, right? And so then, like patterns in our nation are, they're really constructed with armies and navies and border guards and tax structures and water systems and electrical grids, and all these patterns are constructed, right? And then,
They're all centered.
Huh?
They're all centered.
Natural patterns might be hurricanes and tornadoes and dry spells, and they're not much of a pattern, right? So then you say it's a 1,000-year storm or a 100-year storm or something like that. Just say there is a pattern out there somewhere, but let's say it repeats every 100 years, right? So then nature doesn't maybe have so many patterns. At least we can think of places where there's not so much. But then again, there is seasons. The wolves run together in packs, and they mate every year, then mating season, and patterns are there too.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of studies of pattern chaos theory. One of the interesting things to me about chaos theory, which is one of the broadest fields of study of pattern, is allowing the chaos to be, and out of that see the emerging patterns, that how chaos actually is pregnant with patterns. And that out of that, depending on subtle circumstances, a pattern will emerge. Just very subtle differences in chaotic phenomena will produce a stable pattern. And that stable pattern will dissolve back into a chaotic structure. But that the field of that chaos is also structured by, in terms of weather, by temperature, by surface area, by geography, by day or night, so it's in a field of influence all the time. Every piece of chaos is in a field of influence, and the changes in those fields of influence actually change the description of the chaos, or create emerging stable patterns that live for a while or a time or a season or an eon, and then decay back into that field. And so chaos and pattern formation and form are all about our perception of time. Right.
That's for sure. But I mean, like, another thing that all those patterns share, if we're talking about them, they share our observation. So then if that's a factor or not, people are saying in small particles that is a factor. And so then there's probably our expectation too, which is, we don't know what expectation is. It's a series of thoughts and beliefs, and so then maybe is matter malleable by our expectations? Well, our perception of matter is, because maybe matter is more neutral in how we perceive it. People have perceived the world flat and the sun going around the world and all kinds of things according to their own expectations.
Well, there's two things that come to mind when you say that to me, is that management of the reverberation as consciousness, which is, to me, right now, in this few days, is one of my points of curious focus. And the other is that our perception at the subatomic level is based on theories of quantum theory and, electron microscopy, and, we can't know an ultimate truth there because we influence it by looking at it. And so whatever tools we use to go down to those levels describe what we're going to see. Because if you're focusing down to that level, that act of focusing your field down to that level is creative. So it's very, whatever tools you use to create your focus, you can make appear whatever you want at that level. So I find that very comical, that people come up with a new theory of, depending on the focus. It's like creating a musical instrument that creates a very fine waveform. A fine vibration, and depending on the shape of the instrument, you're going to get a different sound vibration down at the end there. So whatever you create your musical instrument to be, reverberating at the incredibly small wavelength, that's what you're going to get.
Well, just like scientists have found other dimensions, they say, and somehow they haven't really seen them, and they just haven't popped out because we're observing from a certain dimension that doesn't see those other things, right?
Yeah.
And so they've intuited them through mathematics, because they try to make a mathematical description of what they're seeing, and they need some more variables. to make it work. And then they find a formula if they'd had a few more variables, and they call those other variables another dimension. The classic one would be spin. And so that's like a bipolar dimension. And but I mean, let's tell viewers a little bit more about what reverberation is, because as far as I understand it, it just means our capacity to hold an experience in an image and kind of store those and order them in a certain way. And so then, in a way, an experience comes up again and again in like a reverberation. Is that somewhat accurate, or?
Well, I'm just open to interpretation myself of what reverb is, but what I wanted to offer into the community who are interested in the evolution of consciousness is to shift our perception at a very primal level of understanding of consciousness. Where at a primal level we're saying that consciousness as a human faculty, separate to the animal community, which doesn't appear in our sense to have a reflective consciousness. We call it reflective consciousness. We separate ourselves from nature and say humans are different because they reflect on their experience. They think about what has happened for patterns, recognition, for feeling, identification, for triggering a fight-flight response from a stimuli, so that we can educate ourselves about doing things in a way that builds this feeling of harmony. But what I put out there to everybody is that the word reflection is a dynamical word from physics as well. And I love these words that cross over from physics into psychology and consciousness. And these words that have dynamics in them, that are used in a conscious or psychological format, are very interesting because they allow us to bridge the worlds of quantum physics and consciousness. And I create the term quantum physics, which is about the qualities and not the quantities in physics being significant. Because when we bridge into qualities, we actually bring in the subtleties of energy which are not about quantity, because all of our energetic understanding has been quantitative really, and is not really qualitative. And when a pattern emerges from chaos, it's the qualities and the shape and pattern that allow that to flow into energy or not.
That's really interesting, because I was just trying to investigate something about sustainability, and I went to some of these town hall meetings or these open meetings where we were developing goals and strategies, and then the most important thing is to develop the metrics. How are you going to know if you're moving? And so then you're saying that in science we have a quantitative metric, but we don't have a qualitative metric.
That's right.
Bingo.
That's what I'm trying to bring forward. And there's two things that we're asking for here. One is the qualitative understanding in physics especially, and we're looking for the management of the reverb. And what I'm trying to show there is that the shift in perception of consciousness is reflective to the management of the reverb, or the reverberation, or the dampening, or the suppression, is really a huge purpose for humanity to grasp as its native characteristic. But I'll take an example that you have a piece of paper and you just sprinkle shavings of iron on there, right? And you float it on a piece of, on a bath or a pool or a lake, right? It doesn't do anything, it just sits there, right? But if you take the same piece of paper and spray it with, spray-on glue, and you put a magnet under that paper, under the table where it is, and then you sprinkle your iron filings on, they will land in a magnetic field pattern, right? And that same sprinkling effect will be organized and aligned according to the magnetic field underneath. You take the magnet away, you take the piece of paper away, and you've got a field pattern on those filings, and you put that on your water, and it will align to the field of the earth. So it has amazing properties. incredible properties just because they're ordered.
Just because those metal filings are in that shape, that they will actually be a magnet.
Yeah.
Or was it because they got magnetized from the magnet proximity that was there during the sprinkling?
Well, it's both, but the fact is that they fell and organized themselves into that field because the field conditions created that alignment. And in a sense, what they were doing in a metaphor is that they were attuning to the greater field. But then they're stuck there, right? They're stuck in an alignment that is attuned to a greater field.
I'd like to say a couple more basic things and that have just come to me right now, actually. Because we talked about, okay, we hear the lawnmower, we feel our body, we feel the heat, we feel this. And we said, okay, that life is a matrix, see? And a matrix actually is just our way, our clumsy way to see everything. And we put it in all kinds of little slots, right? There's slots going this way and slots going that way. And maybe reality is not even a matrix, it's a multiplex, or we don't even know what it is, because some people say it's a unity, or like there's no boundaries whatsoever, or there's, And so then we started to talk about pattern recognition, and patterns then are all in the reverb, Patterns are only in the reverb, If there's a pattern in the matrix, the reverb can't hold it, and we can't really perceive it, right? Or somehow we perceive it through the reverb, because the reverb is the only way that we stretch things and kind of try to get a pattern. So then, and that seems to be like very linear, right? And so then it's our tool, which is our verbal model. The pattern is made out of concepts. They string along, and so they're all very, very imperfect, and we're only seeing like out of a tiny little peephole at the world, but somehow we're able to build a society and build a science and build a life and build our relationships on that peephole. And animals, I don't know, don't necessarily have that peephole, because we said that they're not really doing the reverb thing as much as we are, right? So I mean, are these anything like this make sense, or am I going off on a tangent, or what?
There's two things that come up there. One is that animals are attuned instinctively, and they follow their instinctive field, and they don't go off that deviation because they die if they do. So they're stuck in their field, and they can't not be attuned because their survival depends on that attunement. So their species is attuned to a niche ecoculture in the biodiversity to survive, and they're so attuned. They have to be it's like having the tuning peg on a guitar. It doesn't fit anywhere else on the guitar. It only fits in that spot. The string only fits in that spot, and it doesn't work. It doesn't fit. It doesn't sing. It doesn't feel good if it's in another dynamic.
There's a little bit of flexibility, like pigeons are at the garbage dump, right? And they're eating the garbage instead of what they normally would eat, right? Or the seagulls. So then there's some flexibility, especially around man.
But they don't drive a car. They're not living in a cave. They're not suddenly swimming underwater. They're in a threshold of field interactions that allows them to be, there's... A friend of mine used to say, as a being is, so it acts. Its essence enacts its life. We are human, doing a human purpose, and what we're doing as a species right now, to me, is discovering our species' purpose. We're relatively newcomers on the planet. 10,000 years ago, we really just stopped and started coming together out of the wilderness and reflectively working together, harmoniously working together. And that project is the human project, because it's the act of the reflection that took us out of the wilderness and into cooperation. And co-reflecting together allows us to actually share knowledge and build up a pattern of cohesion together. And what we are, in a sense, doing is those iron filings dropping on the piece of paper, we're searching for our alignment and our true pattern. How do we work together in the greater field to have ease and to have energy flowing through us and to be aligned? We've gone out of attunement, and now we're seeking radically to come back into it, because if we don't, we exhaust all our resources, all our we get so stressed that, you know, our society is breaking up. And there's many things going on. And at the same time, there's huge political forces trying to cause an alignment within the total population. Like there's megalomania in the world right now trying to cause a one world government. And that's a natural evolving phenomena. But it's also unconscious. And so all of the unconscious stress is coming with that. The whole world isn't embracing it because there's a powerful few trying to cause it. And they're causing it, you know, in both a beneficial and a negative way.
Yeah. Are we giving too much power to an influential few? Because they're unconscious as we are. They're even more unconscious because they mistreat so many people that there's got to be a huge numbness there. Because I can realize that, you know, when we open to it, we're reflecting each other, and if somebody is trying to make an objective of a one world government and a lot of power and a lot of ways to do a few things, and cutting out the grassroots approach or all the multiplicity that we really are, I mean, they're really out of touch. And so then how do they have the power to do that? Do we just give it to them?
I'm going to take a few big steps here. For everybody who understands this toroidal model of sacred geometry and how the vortex flows work, you've got a south pole bringing energy in, a twist in the middle, and a north pole bringing energy out. And that model actually reinforces itself, like a smoke ring travels through space by actually reinforcing itself. So it goes out and comes around and reinforces itself. And that keeps that smoke ring having its spatial integrity, is what I call it, spatial integrity, so that it keeps its form in space as it moves dynamically through space. In politics, power is working by reinforcement agencies, enforcement agencies, but they're actually reinforcement agencies.
Yeah.
If you don't have enforcement agencies, you don't keep the pattern in place, right? And those police forces and armies are actually the boundary effect of the centralized mechanism creating a reinforcement pattern. And it's very curious, if you study power, that all systems of power have to have a center, right? And they have multiple cooperative outer centers that feed to a common center, right? And then a few people operate the common center, the regional centers, and so on. And it's all distributed in a very organized way. It's a highly organized pattern. And it's a centered pattern, and it has to have feedback loops all the time. It has to have informational feedback loops, which are like a music that happen on a regular frequency. And they have to, the whole thing is organized on a harmonic feedback loop to the center. All things are, but power has to be, because otherwise it loses power.
What, you know, I mean, somebody mentioned to me that the native Australians had 350 languages. So then they were 350 groups or families or tribes or essences. And I guess they survived without a central power. But, I mean, maybe they were totally disjointed and disconnected too. I don't know. But, I mean, do they have any kind of a model of some other kind of like independent life?
My understanding of the people that were here forever before me.
Yeah, and they said 22,000 years or 40,000 years, but lately we were just saying 10,000 years.
Well, there's lots of evidence that they were here for more than 30,000 years. There's evidence, and I've just been reading about the islands above Australia and how there's evidence of people being there for 30,000 years. And there's a logic to a lot of things in Australia, but that's an academic question about carbon dating and research. But it doesn't mean much. What means a lot is what they sustained here without debilitating the landscape. What's interesting is that in Indonesia, islands to the north of Australia where they actually traded over thousands of years, were highly organized agricultural societies. Bali, Borobudur temples, all of these magnificent agricultural societies were happening at the same time as the people in Australia were living in a nomadic, sustained, harmonious existence. And they were in conscious communication, and a lot of the language overlaps between Indonesia and Australia in the north. The words are used interchangeably in some tribes up there. So they had all the communication, they actually had all the consciousness and the knowledge of the agricultural society, but they didn't need to do it. They didn't need to participate in an organized, centralized agriculture, which engenders all of these other reverberated cultural mechanisms and societies. They actually witnessed the cycles of nature and attuned to the cycles of nature and revered the cycles of nature as their centering principle. And they were aware of their own sustainability in terms of population. They managed their populations brutally to say, we can't have any more people in this region because we won't survive. And so they had to manage their population. They were very aware of the thresholds of the resonant, I would call it a resonant population for a biological area, for a biosphere. But they couldn't sustain more people. And there's lots of examples of that. There's lots of research that a village gets to 144 people around that mark, and it then seeds another village. It seeds another social cohesive group, because at that number of people you can know everybody to a certain degree where you feel good, where you can feel in communication with them. There's no mystery, they're actually participating. It's like 12 families, 20 families, whatever it is. There's a certain amount where you feel cohesive. But to me, what's interesting is that those communities of people that were in Australia and other parts of the world where they are in harmony with nature, they had a law that was based on attunement to nature, and that was sustainable for them. And relatively, they lived in an abundant world, in their relative paradise. They knew where they were, and they didn't want to disturb it. They knew the abundance cycles, and they didn't go beyond them. And they had a spiritual guidance which they would say is interdimensional. And there's no reason to dispute interdimensional communication. There's so many cultures that talk about interdimensional communication. But that can only be a guidance for us. Any interdimensional or spiritual domains can only be a guidance for us. We have to enact our life. We are the ones doing the living. And we are here for the reasons of our better feeling, of tracking our harmony and our joy. And we're doing that now cooperatively, co-reflectively, at the species level now. We're actually co-reflecting as a species to divine our purpose and what we're doing on the planet. It's a critical question, because there's so much power in the world and not enough leadership, because the leadership is lost in a traditional sense of creating wealth and power. It's not got the breadth of the species on its mind and going, what are we doing as a species? Nobody's questing for the essence, purpose of the human species.
Well, even building wealth could be cool if they'd have a different metric, and they would make sure that every socioeconomic strata had their own growth. But if they just say it's all averaged out, and if the rich get rich and the poor get poorer, but the rich get richer, it averages out to more GDP, and then that seems how they measure it now. And then that seems like, for some reason, we got one man equals one vote, and so maybe there's some kind of a hope. I mean, I don't even know. Our votes are always twisted because we're in a way brainwashed by a very narrow observation of what's happening here, and a very narrow interpretation of what's happening, and then a very narrow opportunity of choice. There's not many options. And so then, even to the point where we just kind of opt out of the whole choice process because we say, well, it doesn't matter, it's just hell or hell, whichever one you want.
Well, there's always infinite choice, and it's true that we're educated to perceive that there isn't choice, but there's always infinite choice. There's always infinitely creative ways to take the next step, and that's always the case. It's that we're educated to be black and white, one or the other kind of choice, because then you can be controlled in your choice. If you're presented with two choices, you'll choose one of them, even if they're totally opposite to where
No,
you want to go.
You won't necessarily, because the two choices of, U.S. has got one of the worst political turnout as far as how many people vote. Let's say 40% of the voters will turn out for an off-year election. So then they won't choose. They'll just, and they won't even read the news anymore. And so many people are proud. I don't have television, Well, maybe television's not the best way to get a news, or I don't take the paper. Well, I don't either, because the paper comes in the front door and goes out the back. It's just a cut down tree in my garbage can. And it doesn't seem like that's really a useful way to use paper. But I mean, that's the whole thing that I'm campaigning on in a way, is because like even the spirituality has said, retire to your center and notice that something there is very vast. And in a way, the effect of that is our attention is taken away from the manifest world. And then the cats will play when the mice are away, or something. That's not exactly right, but I mean the mice will play when the cats are away, or somehow without our attention a mischief happens, and then we say, well, we didn't do it because we're on the theory that they committed the crime, but we don't have a theory that we omitted to watch them, so then it's a dance between like the space givers. I give space to the mischief makers, and then they make a big brew of mischief. And so then we're both in it together in a way, in the divine dance.
Yes, it's a divine dance of the unconscious becoming conscious. And we are all giving away our power unconsciously in the Western world right now. From the moment our parents sign the birth certificate, we're actually disempowering our child because we're saying to the state that we're incompetent and that now they're, the state is actually in charge of them until that child wakes up to the fact of its own powerful way. And generally, the fault is that we're not demanding legal education in primary school, in first grade. How does power work? 101 in class 1. Why aren't we educated the way power works?
We could, because, at least in the States, we have what's called homeschool. And so then school can be a wide variety, and the curriculum isn't all that nailed down. And but I guess people just believe in the system, and they believe that you better learn to communicate and to write and to use a computer and all the regular stuff that kind of is just as unconscious.
The question you're asking is, where is our choice being taken away?
Right.
Where are we unconscious? And we're unconscious about power. We're power illiterate. There is no power literacy in the Western world. There's power literacy in management studies at high-level business management and army and military. In the defense forces, there's leadership around power and education around power and strategy. There's strategic management, in a few fields of study. But there's no literacy about power and choice in the population. And it's not a given, right? Why? Because the powerful want to control the masses.
Yeah, but it's a different kind of a power, because we're not interested in power because we're never going to be a general and we're never going to be a president. And who knows, but I doubt it. But really what we need to know is a source of our own power, and how to work with it, and how to
talk to the teacher in grade 1, in class 1, in an empowered way, where the teacher is collaborating with you to empower you. It's not like that. The parents of the homeschoolers don't empower their children to collaboratively empower the children. It's not like that. Nobody's taking a collaborative approach to empowerment with children. No one's teaching the children power. Because if the children get power, the parents don't know how to handle it.
Right.
All right?
They got a school in the U.S. called Sudbury. The first one's in Massachusetts, and there might be 40 of them around, but I don't think they're franchised or anything, that people just copying that idea. And I talked to one lady in Canada that ran a school like that, and they call it a free school or democratic school. And one of the empowering factors is that there's no stratification of the ages. And so then people learn to mentor and be mentored. So then the collaborative part is there. And it's so easy, really. It's so easy just to mix up the ages. They did it on the frontier in the one-room schools.
Well, there's many aspects to empowerment. I'm not an expert on empowerment. There's many books on empowerment. But What I'm just trying to show is that we're not culturing power at all. Power isn't something that we talk about with the kids socially. Well, I was really disempowered today. You know, I was feeling really powerful. I actually spoke my truth. You know, I actually, you know, rose up against all my fear. You know, it's some places at the end of a workshop or at the end of a study, but it's not a communicated thing, especially with children. Children have to learn power unconsciously all the way through. And some parents and some cultures, microcultures within the culture, like the powerful families, educate their children about power from the go, from the birth. They're in a power structure from birth, all the way up. They're cultured around power. And that's the difference, is that those children are groomed into understanding power. Financial power, human powers, interpersonal power, all the way along. And it's very harsh training. It's the same like martial arts and, you know, energy arts. It's a very refined training. It's an impeccable training.
Is power only relevant with resistance or with opposition? In other words, I guess if everybody lived in harmony, we would live in okay, we have power over nature, right? Do we need it?
Well, it comes down to defining power and what is power, because power is a neutral thing. It's not just like energy, it's like electricity. You don't think of electricity as being bad. If you touch it, it'll kill you, if it's high enough voltage and so on. But it's not bad because it creates the power to run your computer. You know, it comes from the sun. You know, all power in our earth basically comes from the sun originally, and we interpret it in different ways as an act of consciousness that we're unconscious of, and we call it energy. And then we call it power in a social setting. But that's why I come back to management of the reverb, because the nature of power is also centered and spiraling and harmonic or reverberative or vibrational. Power is that also in the social culture. It's not just this authoritarian dictatorship of the mother says you can't touch that. It's not like that. It is a love for the child that's reinforcing the child's growth. You can't have just chocolate biscuits every day. You can't just have sweets, you know, it's not balanced, right? There's a love there, there's a reinforcement. Every day the mother feeds the child, you know, that's a cyclic phenomena. And they usually feed them in the same place. It's a centered phenomena. And there's reasons for that, of course. In a tribal setting, they'll go to other places and get the food, but they actually come back to a center where they live, you know, where the energy is good and flows. And so power is also about this pattern reinforcement. And it's really important to culture power in its neutrality and its positivity and its negativity, and see that the decay and the growth cycles have to balance each other. And someone's powerful for a while and then they lose power. You know, it's just, that happens. And a structure is powerful, then it loses power. Now, all of those things are real. It's not simplistic. It's global and it's holistic as well. And it's fed by its field. And how the interactions of the powerful people map into their field, grow their power or not. And in political systems like you have in the States, and we have, you know, trying to wrap around the world at the moment, is you've got what I call, you know, the south pole of that toroidal form, gathering energy to the center, but it's choking it. So it doesn't flow out in its full regale and its full structure and reinforce that flow. And so the flow becomes effortless and it just keeps expanding and growing. We've got a model which is choked at the center by those powerful people gathering the power together. And they create these beautiful roots, you know, wonderful power roots with reinforcement agencies, creating this power structure, which then they choke. And they give a dribble out, you know, it's just like a very flat northern hemisphere of that toroidal model. It's very flat. And then it comes back and feeds this abundant roots, but it just trickles out over the top, just to enough to keep all of those channels happening. Instead of creating an abundance out, which is the sort of the giving, the social aspect of politics, of giving out and reform and, you know, the feedback, it's this gathering and choking. And that other giving out is the act of consciousness. of the realization that you have to have that feedback loop, that you actually have to have that branching, flowering, fruiting phenomena for the roots to be nourished, for the whole thing to grow, that it's an important holistic view of politics and the world and how everything works. And what we're getting is, the right wing, as it's called in politics, is a necessary thing, phenomena, to gather energy and power and organize it. And there's many different streams of thought written about the tiers of organization before they become to a spiritual realization and flower. And most cultures start out with a right-wing sort of leadership, or a very autocratic, authoritarian leadership.
It's traditional, right?
To gather the power together, to cohere the people and the society. And then they give way to someone who's more reformist, more socially oriented, and gather the power and then do good things with it. Because people won't keep supporting, they'll go to war if there's not a feedback loop of benefits from this power generation. So if we get like the wonderful society of the USA creating this incredible society that has all these wonderful fruits of technology and the society and highways and satellite systems and all of these wonderful things. But if they didn't have those benefits, and it was just all this power and tax and everything, no one would support it.
Right. Well, I mean, that's it. That choking is happening, so then it's getting less and less. Whatever. I mean, the roots are richer and richer, but somehow the flow is
well,
kind
the
of
organization
constricting.
of the roots is finer and finer in richness and quality. Like the way they can tax people becomes more and more fine. They're making more and more laws all the time. They never stop making laws to create taxes and straitjacket the community, right? In Australia, in the States, everywhere, the law-making machine is running all the time, never stops. And so the straitjacket on society gets finer and finer and finer.
Yeah. It's kind of going the other way, though, because like really they're making laws. The reason the tax code is this thick is it's full of loopholes and exceptions, right? And so then they're saying like, you got to let that guy off the hook. Oh, this guy can get off the hook. Oh, you can do that. And then they're keeping the illusion going by just saying, well, hey, we can we can just borrow money and we can spend that for our social goods, right? And then we can borrow a certain amount of money for depending on what our gross natural product is. A certain percentage of that can be borrowed, and we'll just keep it. It's not really borrowed; it's just kind of a balloon.
The difficulty there, I feel, when our conversations get to that point at this layman's level, is that we're not seeing the motivations behind the veil of the powerful, which is to bankrupt societies and get them entrapped in slavery for their other plans, which is, to expand their power base to a global power base. Right? And so power always wants to expand itself. It just wants to keep growing because it's a tree just like everything else. And so what I feel we need to realize is that there's a natural expansion of power, but it's got to be on a holistic model, and it's got to have the fruiting and the benefits balanced. And whenever that's not happening, there's something wrong. There's a power choke going on, and those people running the leadership are out of tune. It's very obvious and simple that that's happening now, but they're doing it in a mysterious, behind-the-scenes way, where they're not touchable.
Yeah. We've talked about that before on our discussions, and I don't know if this is a time to bring it in. I mean, I would like to kind of put it in there a little, because you said the power, they want to bankrupt society for their own purposes. And really what I learned just a few months ago is because of our structure of ownership and how we can have rights to property and to monopolies, then we create capital, which is excess wealth. Excess means above and beyond what I can spend. And then there's nobody really that puts their, some people will speculate in land and gold and things like that and in a way park their wealth, but most people want to invest it. And so then it turns out that wealth has got a positive feedback loop that's built itself to such a magnitude that there's not really that many investments. And then the financial structures search for debt. They need debt, you know, and it's not necessarily to bankrupt the world and so that they can run it all, because what do they run? They'll run a pile of misery, you know. But they do need to make interest and dividends and collect rents, because they've got that amount of money that's always increasing. And so then what used to be scholarships now is student loans, right? What, you know, all our generosity toward other countries called foreign aid is really foreign loans, right? And so then everyone is pushed to a max: credit card loan, mortgage fiasco, all the different kind of debts, credit cards, and our national debt, and so then, because these bankers in business and industry is motivated by this pile of capital, which is like a mountain, it's not just a pile, and the planet Earth lives on structural debt, you know. And then that's something we've never tried to contend with it, because we've always needed capital when capital was a local phenomena. But when it's an international phenomena, it's very damaging to the local. And so that's what's happened. You know, it just got out of hand, right? And then,
well, I don't know that it got out of hand. It's deliberately manipulated by extremely wealthy people. If you're a trillionaire, you manipulate the planet.
Well, that's it. You manipulate it, but I mean, you manipulate it to invest your money to make it grow, because that's a belief structure that we have.
It's not to make your money grow, it's to make your power grow.
Well, they're hand in hand, aren't they?
Well, the money system, the digitized financial system, is a power structure before it's a money structure in these days in the world. And there's two things there, is that the Western model is based on this debt structure bankrupting everything, but the Middle East model, the Muslim model, is not. It's based on collaboration. It's collaborative. You know, bankers invest with the person who's got the vision and takes the risk with them, and if they succeed, they take the profit with them. In the Western model, which the West doesn't want us to know that model exists, that it's working and it's collaborative, because, you know, there's a whole lot of politics involved in that. And that's, you know, the power struggle between the Christian world and the Muslim world is also a power financial struggle, because embedded in the Muslim model is a collaborative financial model that works.
So in other words, Muslims don't take interest, but they just share the profit if there is profit?
Well, that's the banking,
something like that?
Yeah, the banking structure of the Muslim world is that they don't have interest. It's against their religion. Against their religion. And part of the problem is that in the West, or the Western world, we have a consciousness that's free, that's allowing ourselves to explore everything except power, really. But in the Muslim world, it's not a free consciousness, but they have a collaborative power structure. And so they have a collaborative, creative power, but a lack of freedom in their personal social life. Whereas we've been given the freedom. It's almost like there's some strange balance point here, that the freedom in the social model allows everyone to be distracted and not given power. But in the Muslim model, they're not given power, you know, creative power. They're given financial collaboration.
Wow, you know, that's just like, I mean, I've heard many times that interest was against the law, you know, in Muslim. And I didn't know if it was just religious law or actually secular law. And I never put two and two together to figure out what it meant, you know.
Of course.
Because you just said that nobody, you know, they keep that under wraps, right? But I mean, that would be my ideal. I would say, man, that is the coolest thing, you know.
It is the coolest thing. And what's interesting, if you look at us as a species, we've got two models running of power in the world. A collaborative model and a dictatorial power suck model, right? Both have got benefits. And they're not, and then there's wisdom in both. And there's wisdom in the free consciousness of our society, and there's wisdom in the sort of focused model on collaboration and no interest. No exploitation.
No rents, you know, they call that the power to have a rent, you know, or the power to drain off wealth, right? And you drain it out.
One is quite exploitative. Our society is quite exploitative, right? And the other one is not about exploitation, but it's unconscious in that way. Both are unconscious. Both are seeking wisdom, right? And if you take the essence of the Western and the Muslim model and you take them out of the Christian and the Muslim setting and look at them as power structures and say, what's the wisdom of this one? What's the wisdom of that one? And how can we put them together so we've got the benefits of both, right? Yeah. You'd sack the interest-bearing model because it's exploiting everybody to the max, and it's ramping up rather than becoming more balanced. Because it's not collaborative with the community. It's gone beyond its scale. It's gone to a global level of exploitation.
Yeah, that's the scale problem is really the problem, because it used to exploit, but it used to build community, right? And it used to be interested in a ongoing community because the people had to live there. Or even the bosses had to live in the town, right? And they wanted good roads and good, no crime and good employment, and they wanted all those things. But now the people that it's gone. It seems to me more a problem of scale. That the scale has gone so far beyond the community that the community is kind of the enemy. It's just like something to be a parasite on the community.
Well, it's like someone coming along to a community that does an activity and creates a surplus product, right? And it says, okay, well, I'll help you create this product, but I'm going to stick this vacuum cleaner on your community. You know, there's this big hole at the gate of the village, right? It's just a vacuum, right? And it's always sucking, you know. And every time you create product, you have to put all your product in front of this vacuum, and whatever it sucks off, and whatever it leaves in front of the vacuum, you can have. But whatever it sucks off, you're going to be happy with because I helped you create it.
Yeah. Well, when that was in the community, that was all right. But now what happens is they come there, they buy that business from the community. Well, they close it and they move it to China. And then they just instead of a vacuum, they put a pile of products there that totally fleeces you, and you have no more source of income because you're,
that's the Western model. You've got to look at these things simplistically, because the Muslim model of financial participation is that we'll come and help you, stand beside you, plant the seed, and now at the end of the day, I'll take my share out of it, and I'll walk away, and whatever you're doing from there on is yours. Right?
So it's the great part of that is that everyone wants success, see, because I only get paid as a banker if you succeed, and in the West, the loans get first shot, and then even if we close you go to bankruptcy, but we have priority in taking what's left.
The worst case in the Western model is that they're putting in a permanent suck. They're orchestrating a permanent suck on everybody's life, and it's orchestrated.
Structural debt is what I called it.
They supply the cash flow to the point at which they create interest on your not being able to pay it back, and then they keep supplying you the credit until you can only pay back the interest. So you can never repay back the loan. That's the simplistic model, right?
Yeah, refinance. You can always refinance. Just turn it over. Yeah, right on.
It's the obvious. Yeah, everybody can see it. It's obvious. That's what's happening. They supply you with as much debt until you can only pay the interest. And they'll keep supplying you with credit.
And roll it,
until you start defaulting. And then they'll halt you. Then they say, you can't have any more.
Yeah.
So at that point, you're on permanent suck.
Yeah, right. Slavery. So it's economic slavery.
Yeah.
Let me just say,
the only way out of that, which is important to show the solution, is just to say, okay, I'm stopping repayments right here, right now. Right? And you just tell them, I can't repay, and you can't repay, and you can't repay. And you just start telling them that you're in your right, that you're not a slave, and that is a wrong. And you keep telling them that is wrong, and you look up the law that says that that's a wrong. You look at the Bible and tell them that that's a wrong, and you send that to them and say that's a wrong. And that's the way out, is to tell them that it's wrong.
So when collectively that happens, it means the constriction of the Torah got too much, and then collectively we just say, stop it.
Yeah.
And then there is going to be a collapse, right? Or a new restructuring, which may or may not be
Well, if everybody stands up and just says that's wrong, I've got to the point at which I can only pay interest, that's wrong. Look, it's in the Bible it says it's wrong. It's in all these laws and the Constitution that says it's wrong.
In the Quran is it wrong? It's wrong.
Everywhere it says it's wrong.
Yeah.
Everywhere it says it's wrong. You just have to do your research and send it to them in a letter saying it's wrong.
Yeah.
And ask them to prove how they can justify it.
So do we have to get together and make a constitutional amendment?
Well, it's in the Constitution already.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's already in the Constitution. It's already
Just
in the Bible.
the right to go bankrupt, or what?
It's called competency, right? If you're not competent to look it up and write it in a letter and send it to the debt agency, well, who are you? You go back to school until you can learn to research on the internet, on your phone, where it says it's wrong, print, send.
Yeah,
If
cool.
you can't do that, you're incompetent.
Yeah.
If you can't empower yourself with these incredible tools to write a letter that says that's wrong, when here's the evidence that I researched that says it's wrong in the Constitution, in the Bible, in the Quran, and blah, 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 put it in and send it to the debt agency and tell them it's wrong, they have no comeback.
Yeah. What's happened so far with people that have done that?
They have no comeback. They can't answer it. They can't prove that they're justified.
They just say law number so and so and so and so. We've.
You just send it back to them and say it's
that's wrong too.
It's wrong.
Yeah.
Show me how this is right. Get them to prove.
Okay, 14 million homes in the last 4 years have been foreclosed on in the U.S. 40 million people are on the street, right? They're not on the street, but
they're not empowered people, unfortunately.
Yeah.
They didn't do that. They didn't do their own research. They didn't look it up and send it to them and go, it's wrong. They didn't, right? You ask all of those people on the streets, did you do that? Did you research it?
A couple of people did things, like I know a guy that's been in his house for like 18 months without making a payment, and he just doesn't go. And then a lot of people just say, well, I don't want this hanging over my head, and it feels bad, so I'll just get the hell out of here. Then there's some people like in the Occupy, we're actually in a poor neighborhood that these Occupy people have gone into the lady's house and just camped out there and said, look, no foreclosure here. And so then there have been different kind of
look at
responses.
The roots of it. The roots of it are the basic society is wrong. Right? The basis of society is wrong.
Just that kind of society, not everyone.
It's knowingly supplying credit to people to the point at which they can only pay the interest back. And then something goes wrong in those people's lives in which they can't pay the interest for a moment or a week or a month or a year. And then they say, okay, now we own your house, which is a deliberate strategy.
Yeah, wait a minute now, because there's two forces working here, like one force is just they supply credit to a lot of people and they can still make the payments, But then on the other thing that's going on is these multinational corporations are buying and closing factories and downsizing and laying off people, and then those are the people that can't make it, right? And basically the whole pinch is that real wages haven't gone up for 30 years. So then our natural stepping forward of inflation runs into a kind of a glass ceiling and says, okay.
Which is interests.
Yeah. It can't, and then some people just get caught in this thing, but I don't, normally it's working that, for 60 years, I've had mortgages and paid them off. And if I didn't pay them off, property values increased, which is not really true. It's just an inflation measure, but that's a shift of wealth. And, I don't know, 60 years, I'd say that I watched it. It always worked. And then just these last 2 years ago, it didn't. It took a giant step in the reverse, but you can see it all comes because of the constriction, what you called of the toroid, of the roots, and then the constriction and the pitiful flow out the top that real wages for the common man have not grown. And so then naturally we have to reach a point of no return where that can't really continue. I don't look at it as such a conspiracy. It's a convergence of different things that are that
There's
are
a
converging.
basis of it in simple energetic flow that egoic power centralizes its operations. Right? It does.
Because we got that written into the institutions that says you can do it, but we don't have to say you can do it. We could say, no, you got to be community-based.
The fact is that power centralizes itself for efficiency. You have a head office.
Yeah.
Right? It's
we believe we have to be efficient. We have to be world competitive and all that stuff, because somehow the way our economy works is based on some kind of a flow of, what do you call it? A reinforcing flow, And somehow it seems like you need to activate in the world in order to make that work.
We're looking at it from an individual perspective. Right? And we're competing on an individual basis, and corporations come over and organize the individuals, right? And they have a said head office, right? power center, right? And they organize them into corporations, right? The individuals are organized and they're given enough to keep themselves going, and they take as much as they can off, but leave them in a sustainable way, right? So the individuals are left in a sustainable loop of operation, right? And any excess that it produces, they suck off.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
so
only one form. There could be other forms, you know. I thought of other forms because, okay, institutions favor certain things. It's written in the institution. Very simple. We have capital gains tax, which means like all wealth pays half the tax that workers pay. So even a trillionaire pays half the tax that, and there's other loopholes and stuff where they could probably shelter lots of income, maybe all of it, because I heard like GE didn't pay any taxes for a couple of years or whatever. It's just mega big. Okay. It could be the other way around, You could just say, well, wealth pays more tax than labor, number one. Or my favorite would be that employee-owned companies would pay half the taxes as companies owned by stockholders. And then employee-owned companies are always for the community because they live there, right? And they wouldn't have to just be unprofessional. They would still hire managers and hire CEOs and all that stuff, but they wouldn't be asking for dividends. They'd just be asking for make the community better, pay more taxes in a way, or build projects, or get our community to be better, make our schools better, make everything better around.
I think what I'm trying to communicate is that it's pretty obvious the way the power structures are working in the world, and there's two major ones operating economically, but they all are formed around centralizing formats necessarily, but their motivations are different. The power sharing, when it gets past the center point, is different.
You mean the capitalist and the Muslim?
Yeah, but there's lots of varieties of that. But by the nature of energy, which interprets itself into power and human society, it's all centralized phenomena. But it's how the power sharing at the end, or past that gathering point, is dynamically created, is the truth or the abundance or the health of that. And what I'm just offering is that we need to understand that this model, this toroidal phenomena that happens in energy forms and biological forms, is innate in all things, and it manifests in society and organizational platforms, and that we need to pay attention to that, because that's the way health of an economy or a society is going to perpetuate. And by tuning into that, we're actually tuning in very deeply to the qualities or quantum physics of reality. And we get a relative ease and abundance of progression, and we get technologies and things that are actually attuned to nature, not against nature, not against ourselves, not creating stress. We actually get societies and suburban organizations, town planning, everything that's based on an attuned model. And we don't have any nature models that we're creating our technologies and societies based upon. It's all random. There's no alignment and attunement there. There's no cohesion across the society of what were we doing. We don't have a species purpose defined.
So we're all disempowered on that, and we're just like don't even think there could be one.
The stress and the flux of changing systems and models breaking down and setting up. There's no social model that integrates with physics, because physics is dry and quantitative, and it doesn't have heart.
Doesn't have qualitative.
Doesn't have qualitative. So we have qualitative physics, which is a very different study to quantum physics. We're actually going to get a society based on qualities and feeling and a path towards harmony and so on. And I come back to that statement that my suggestion is that consciousness is about the management of the reverb. And the management of the reverb is the enactment of the truth that energy has these properties, and consciousness has these reverberative properties, that a thing occurs and we don't just reflect on it. We think about it again and again and again, and we share it with other people, and where the reflection or someone else says, yeah, that's a good idea, we go, oh, that's a good idea. That feels good when someone else says it's a good idea. I'll remember that. And that remembering or acting upon that feedback, which is what reverb is, says, oh, I'll go forward with that. I'll do that again. I'll repeat that vibration again, which is reverberation, which is an act of managing that which has a harmonic resonance.
Let me, you really brought something new to our discussions that, we've never talked about qualitative physics. And we've only talked about quantity, and we never even thought of the metrics being like so key. We thought of metrics in social situations as being really key. And I wanted to ask you a couple things, because like when you were talking about the toroid, you were talking about kind of like physical systems. It seemed like energy flow and so on, and the way matter works. But then you also related that to consciousness and to social thought structures and behaviors and so many things. I mean, it was, I wanted to kind of ask a basic question, because like in the engineering of energy, at least in the window that we're looking through, which means like the frequencies of light that we can see and the temperatures that we can live in and all of that kind of stuff in our window and the sounds we can hear, all energy has something called impedance. And impedance has to do with like resistance, whether it's just pure resistance manufactures heat, takes energy and makes heat out of it, which is another kind of energy. But other kinds of impedance actually transform energy in other ways, from electrical fields to magnetic fields and so on like that. But I mean, when you were saying that the flow degenerates itself, I wanted to know what, just maybe talking about the physical, and then we'll see if we can relate it to social and to consciousness. But I mean, is there some kind of an impedance? Does it have to keep getting boosted? Or, I mean, are we talking about a perpetual motion machine? Or what is impedance and resistance to energy?
It's a holistic phenomena. All of these things apply. Everything is a metaphor for everything else. It has to be. There is no separation. You are made of the same stuff as I am, as this is. The form of this table is made out of wood which grew in a tree, which had a central energetic form. In that growth, the seed had to come up through the soil. There had to be a pressure created for that to grow. How did that happen? Heat had to come in through the shell of the seed, and as it came in through the shell of the seed, it changed its wavelength. Just like the light coming through the glass changes its wavelength and gets trapped inside this room by the change of its wavelength. It's frequency modulated by the shell, by the glass, and it can't get out again because the wavelength gets too long. And in the shell of the seed, the same thing happened, that the heat and the energy, as we think of it, got trapped inside that shell and created this pressure for the shell to burst. But it only stayed in there because it was then harmonically, acoustically focused to the point of growth in the seed. It focused itself like a parabola into the center of the seed, at which all of the energy was cohered by the shape of the seed into a resonance that allowed the sprout to grow. And all of the sprout and all of the shape of the leaves and all the roots were a resonant form containing the energy still. So as the energy accumulated in that form, it still reverberated in that thing. And it keeps growing reverberatorily into a tree. And then all of the leaf shapes and all the structure of the tree is a reverberatory structure. If you get a spark and you make the spark jump or burn itself into a piece of wood, you'll see the resonant shape burn into the wood. It's a resonating spark shape that will grow into that wood. And if it's magnetic or static, it'll take the shape of the roots or the branches, depending on the nature of the frequency and the modulation of that reverberation, but it will keep growing into those forms. Crystals, everything grows according to a resonant geometry. And so impedance is an act of pressuring something through something that is not harmonically receptive to it, that can't that thing that you're trying to push it through can't expand because it's not a growing system. It's not a living thing. So we create impedance, in a heater to radiate heat, right? Because it won't live in that thing. If we create the coils, it'll sing, and energy will sing and live in it for a while, but then it'll still radiate out, either as sound, mechanical energy, or light, or heat. But if that is an acoustical phenomena, the thing will sing or it will grow. Like if you put sand on the top of the washing machine in a tray and turn the washing machine on, the sand will take a pattern. It will take the resonant pattern of the washing machine vibration. And you'll see the sand pattern take that form.
So you'll know if you got gym shoes in there or just nylons.
That's right. If you got gym shoes, you'll be clunky wave peaks. If you got nylons, it'll be fairly flat, right? And you'll be able to tell that exactly, for the quality of the waveform will tell you what's in the washing machine. And that's a qualitative picture that you can take a photo and send to someone. They can say, hey, it's nylons. You've been having a good time with your missus, so. Right? But if you're not, if you've got clunky boots in there, you put a brick in there, the washing machine's just going to go a few big peaks and then it's going to stop. And you're going to see a few big shifts in the sand and that's it. And so, if you've got just water in there swirling around, it's meant to be in there and it's the lightest thing and the washing machine will love it and you'll get a very regular pattern on the surface of that sand. There'll be a very obvious difference, right? And if, you could put cement on that drying and as the washing machine's, doing its thing, the cement will form and then form a hard structure, which you can then take out and imprint on the wall or other sand, right? And it's a structure that's been formed by that vibration and that spin and so on. And, all of these reverberations actually have qualities that enhance their field or not. And the field and its thing, or the thing and its field, the relationship of those things are really the progression or the annihilation of consciousness and life. And we are so unconscious of our relationship with our field in our society. We've totally lost, in many cases, the relationship to our field, to our environment, to the galaxies, to the stars, to everything. We get up and stay up into the night with artificial technologies, and we're so out of tune with the natural tide of the sun and the energies of every 2 hours. Like the Eastern guys who do Qigong, the Qigong masters plot every 2 hours. They know which organ is active every different 2 hours of the day. And if you do the wrong activity out of sync with that organ, you will get ailments in that organ because you're just using the energy of that time wrongly.
So we need a tray of sand, so to speak, right? On ourselves, or some way to watch ourselves more closely.
Yeah.
When I first started to hear you say reverb, I was thinking, because we were talking about, well, reverb is in time because it comes back as an echo, right?
Mm.
And so then I thought it was images of mind, it was like memories, and I thought it was a pattern or pattern recognition. And then then we talked about the patterns in society and the patterns in nature and the patterns of energy. And then it was very interesting when you started to speak about the seed and how there's a reverb there too, because it does have a memory, right? I mean, it doesn't seem to be abstract image, but it wants to make a certain kind of a plant, and it takes, that was a beautiful story when you started to say how the sun or the heat goes into the shell of the seed, and really that's what happens, we just never thought of it that way. We just thought you water it, but water is kind of a medium where it all can move, I guess. And how energy just recreates itself through that stored reverberation. And then how can we say more about, you said so much about it, but like managing the reverb, like just first you have to identify it, right? And then some.
Well, I think everyone has this historical notion that humans are separate from the animals and nature because they have reflective consciousness. That's our great human pride. I'm a reflective
It's our contribution to
consciousness.
the universe.
That's right. I'm a reflective consciousness. Well, what does that mean? What is that doing in the world? What does reflective consciousness do? It reflects again and again and again. And that multiple reflection is what I'm suggesting is reverb. It's not just one reflection, it's reflection.
Right, it's a great
out.
word and a great way to look at it.
Back, and it's reflection, and it's reflection. So it's a reflection, 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 reflection. With you, reflection, reflection. With my reality, reflection, 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 which is actually reverberation.
Yeah.
And if you take that reverberation and you study, okay, what is reverberation about? It's about form creation. Just like the sand on the washing machine. So I'll tell you a little story. Maybe it's a closing story. Well, this space shuttle, we go up in the space shuttle, we're in orbit, we're in free space, and then, the pod bay doors open, like the big canister doors of the space shuttle open, and this astronaut goes over, floats over, and he's got the crane, comes down, and he picks up this huge drum, like a tank, so big steel drum that fits in the whole space shuttle, lifts the whole thing out, and he goes in, he's got like a zip unties around the center of the equator of this big canister. It's like a big tank, and he goes, undoes this whole thing. And he manipulates the crane, and the crane takes the can away, and out of it flows mercury. Right? It's this big blob of mercury, right? This huge silver blob of mercury, right? Just sitting in space. And the can goes back, and it closes the doors, and the crane's gone. The astronaut's just there, and he floats back over to this blob of mercury, which over time is starting to cohere and lose all its waveform. If he doesn't touch it, it just forms this perfect sphere, right? Big mercury ball, like a mirror ball, disco, right? Big mercury ball. Just floating in space. It's got its own center of gravity. Right? And then you get to drumstick, and it just goes to the mercury ball and just goes ding, and there's a waveform goes and shimmers over the whole of the wave, right? And it just does that until all the vibration is mopped up into the molecules. But if he hits it again when the waveform comes back, he can deepen that point, right? So he can dimple it deeper, and then it'll come out and oscillate again and dimple again deeper. But if he hits it out of time or out of position with that initial waveform, without any consideration for that initial or tonic form, it will cause separation. It will cause a bit of mercury to fly off. Right? And same with disease, same with everything, is if we don't act in harmony with the thing and its energetic properties, we cause separation. We cause, the thing to break or disintegrate. But if he keeps hitting it in the right timing, and timing is critical because that's about harmony, it's about managing the reverb. If he keeps hitting it, then it will grow deeper and deeper, and he will get real deep oscillations going on in that mercury ball. If he hits it in two dimples, he'll create a polar effect. He creates a spin and a dimple and a spin and a dimple. He can actually manage it to pulse and do all sorts of peaks, wave peaks here and there, right? And you can see, that one's peaking there and that one's troughing there. If I hit the trough, it'll deepen. And so you can sculpt this mercury ball into this amazing pulsing shape. But if he hits it out of time with the first pulse, he's causing separation, right? So he's got to be aware of timing, he's got to be aware of spatial integrity, he's got to have a 3D model of adding energy to it. So you can only add energy in harmony with that livingness, with the thing doing its pulse. You can't drink cement. Right? It doesn't work. It gets stuck. It sets and you can't get it out. Right? You can't do that. Right? You can't just hit your head with the brick. Right? It doesn't work. You get blood coming out. Right? Separation stuff happens. Right? You have to eat of the foods that re-enhance and reinforce your form. Same with the car. You can't put water in a car these days because it doesn't run on hydrogen splitting. It actually runs on petroleum. Right? In some cars, it's so finely tuned you can't even put the different grades in. You can't put diesel in a petrol car. Right? They both burn, but they're finely tuned. It's like the system of life, like a bird can't eat, a pigeon doesn't eat, rocks. It doesn't eat what it's not supposed to eat. All systems are keyed in relationship to their field, right? And the astronaut in that example represents the field energy intersecting with it. But the field energy has to map exactly sensitively with that thing to keep the form growing and reverberating in its shape. And so one of the primal things is to understand in that Mercury ball thing is that if you want to keep adding energy infinitely to that Mercury ball, it has to keep reinforcing itself. And if you get it spinning, those waves spinning on that Mercury ball, the only way you can keep adding energy in is a very particular way. It's this toroidal model of energy wrapping around the outside and coming in through the south and going out through the north. And if you look at that model, it's like the mother of all archetypes. It's got the tree branching, the river, the estuary. It's got the equatorial flow. It's got so many things going on. It's got polarities. It's a very rich model. And my suggestion, and there's a lot more in there than we've ever realized, and how that as a subatomic structure creates cascading forms building up. But if you look at it as a subatomic model, all of those waveforms going on in there, every little ripple on that Mercury ball can hold information. So if the astronaut goes over with the loudspeaker and goes, boo, there's a waveform of boo goes in and out and around that thing and gets embedded in that Mercury ball waveform. And whatever information is in the vibration of that thing, but the mass, the toroidal flow, is really described by the spin. And so if you put your hand through the water and you make this little whirlpool behind your hand, you can actually feel it. It has mass. You can feel it. And if you do really, really strong, you can knock something over with it, right? If you run around the swimming pool with 10 people and then you all get out, the whirlpool's still going, right? And you put your hand in there and it'll get swept along, right? It has mass. It has momentum. Right? It has inertia because of the water, but also because of your intention. So your intention has created that form.
So that mass or inertia is the reverb?
In some degrees, yes, it has to be. But if you stand in the way of that whirlpool, and you make that whirlpool decay, so you kill that mass, right? So if you're in harmony with it and you move in harmony with that whirlpool, you can make it stronger. You can make it live longer. But if you put your hand in and stop it, the whole thing becomes turbulent, decays. There's no longer that form there. The form is disintegrating, is gone. But you can, if you do it with your hand, you can take a photo of it, you can feel it, you can measure it, you can see it. It's a thing that you created with your intention. And there's a guy called Helmholtz, who was around before Einstein, and Einstein studied Helmholtz among other people. And Helmholtz did all these studies on creating whirlpools in different spins and seeing how they interacted. And he saw that they were like chemical reactions, that the polarities bonded and they formed chains and stuff according to their spin. It's so much in this understanding of the toroidal model that we haven't really explored, because I don't want to go into it here. It's part of my own research too. But in the spin flows, you basically got mass properties. And in the vibratory properties, you basically got informational or qualitative properties. And so the spin is basically describing the inertial mass, whereas all the vibrations on it and the difference is describing the individual properties and the qualitative informative properties. And so in my model, we have an undifferentiated sea of charge, which to me is like the ocean or the field. And when consciousness focuses into that, it dimples that ocean or field. And as soon as there's a dimpling in waves, the waves will start to cohere and move around it. And if there's a deep dimpling, then the waves will actually start to spin around it. And if you feed, that, the form will grow. Or if you put a dynamic like a drain in a pond or a bath, you'll form this dynamic. And interestingly, in a bath, all those water particles align themselves around that point magically. It's under low pressure, self-organization occurs. And when you take that plug out, there's a low pressure formed, and self-organization occurs around that. And so the pattern, the qualitative structure of the water changes according to that low pressure. And so there's a whole lot of understandings on how you manage the reverb to do with pressure, to do with self-organization, to do with harmonics, to do with centeredness, to do with spin. All of those are physics phenomena. But the way you manage them is from a qualitative point of view. So all those phenomena of physics turned into acts of consciousness with intention actually gives you tools to manage the reverb in society, politics, culture, interpersonal relationships, all these different things. Self-organization in your relationship doesn't occur under high pressure. If someone's pressurizing you to do something that they want you to do, you're not self-organizing at all. You're acting under pressure from your friend or partner or whatever, saying, you got to mow the lawn.
Are there different thresholds of pressure? We can get used to pressure or something. I want to ask you so many fascinating things that you talked about, the spin being mass and the dimples being informational and hitting in reinforcing pattern. And I was just thinking about now people are coming together because of a realization that society is off the beat, and that we call it Occupy in a lot of different cities. And I think it's going to be really an enormous phenomena in this coming year, because this is our election year, and this is really when we're fed up with the national debt and the way money's managed and the way wealth is divided, really. And so then what we need to do is somehow, number one, self-organize. So we have to be either in what we consider low pressure, or otherwise we have to adjust what's low pressure for us so we can self-organize. And we have to learn to say things and think things that hit the moving system in some kind of synthesis and rhythm that is reinforcing and building, and not just chaotic creating. And it's, I don't know, is that something we can learn, or do we really have to is that something that's going to self-organize, that if we just
self-organization takes place under low pressure. So first step is, how do you create low pressure economy? How do you take the pressure off the people? How do so you've got to stop draining them of this
So the
interest.
pressure's the debt now.
Yeah. You've got a debt structure they have, it's like, first of all, you've got fear-mongering going on, which is pressure. The war on terror.
Well, that's always, always fear-mongering, because you can really control people with fear.
Because it's pressure.
Yeah.
Fear is pressure in society. It's pressure dynamics, right? You're pressuring anything, and it deforms according to the shape that you put that pressure on with, right? Mm. So if you take the pressure off, people can self-organize. So if you don't say that the debt structure is wrong, then you're accepting that pressure. So you first of all have to say, we have to reorganize the way we capitalize projects and activity away from interest-bearing loads, right?
Wow.
We have to have collaborative banking.
Wow.
Which collaborates, and the models are already out there in the world, done.
Right. And then we have to be cognizant
on nation levels.
That low pressure and self-organization is non-local. So that means that those that want to concentrate power are not going to like low pressure.
So microfinance in a suburban environment where your suburb has its own cooperative made up of the heads of the Parents and Citizens Association, right? All the school Parents and Citizens Association presidents get together and form the microfinance network. And through the Parents and Citizens organizations, you work out what wealth is in your school to be lent to the various people in the community. And the Parents and Citizens Association run the microfinance units for your suburb, right? Doesn't need anyone else from anywhere else. You don't need anyone from anywhere to tell you how to do it. You've got all the wisdom right there amongst your school parents, right? Obviously. You don't need anyone else outside your suburb to tell you what to do. You've already got the structures. You've got to look at the structures that are already there, centralized structures. They're already there. The school system with caring parents who are already elected. They don't need to be elected. They're already elected. They just need to meet and go, okay, how can we create microfinance? Because if we bring the banks in, they're going to suck us dry. Obviously. Okay, it's got to be collaborative, low-pressure self-organisation, so therefore we have to take time and work out how we can gather the money from our community that already exists and put it together to finance this project, right? And the benefit of that project, whatever it is, will come back to our community and be distributed to the people who have put the money up. Not with interest, but with profit. And so the project will get up, create the community more abundant, and all the resources of that will come back to our community. It won't get sucked off and go into some trillionaire's pocket somewhere else who doesn't know what to do with himself because he doesn't have any other activity, because he owns everything. If you're a trillionaire, the only thing you can do is become more powerful. And so you have to set up finer and finer systems of suck. This is obvious. Well, there's no point feeding that system anymore. There's no point engaging the banks. The banks are controlled by the central banks, which are controlled by the banking families. It's three-tier basic stuff, and it's just a vacuum cleaner. So turn it off. Don't participate. Microfinance on the local level, self-organized. If you cut that pressure off, you've got low pressure. You can self-organize the way you want to through existing structures that are already there. It's easy. It's not hard.
Yeah.
You
well,
just
one
have
thing that
to...
comes to me is that this system is compatible to the other system. In other words, it could be apart from it, but it doesn't have to be either or. In other words, we could even have our own currency or something that was more stable and not necessarily
Your suburb, you know.
Yeah.
Aspens, or, you know, Pennsylvania, no, not even Pennsylvania, like Allentowns. I used to live in Allentown when I was a kid. Now, Allentowns, you know, or Allens or whatever, it doesn't matter, but you don't even need to invent that because that's a distraction. The whole thing is to get away from all the distraction and the difficulty and just zoom to what you want, which is already existing structures that are of caring people that care about the kids, right? Care about the generations. They're already in place. They're already known. There's social workers there already. Get them involved. There's all the community workers who have already got their badges of I care written on them, right? And that you just elect them or find them ones that care. You know they care. They're the people that you want to run your microfinance. You don't want bankers who are out there to rip you off with suction finance. It's already obvious. You're asking the wrong people to manage your lives, like we are, like I am. I just write back and say it's wrong. Justify that, you show me where it's right. And they can't. There's no answer because they know it's wrong. It's all in the Constitution and the Bible, it's all wrong. There's already the models out there. It's always a shift of focus. It's not about whether those guys are wrong or right. It's that they're making a right-wing power system structure, right? They've shown us all of that, right? We have to do the same, but with a different focus, with a different center. Theirs is on greed, right? We've got to create one that's about care, which is about harmony between ourselves and our field. Theirs isn't about that. It's just about creating the southern pole. We actually need the north pole now really badly to balance out the whole flow. If we don't balance out this structure, it's going to die. The shoot has come up and it's been cut off. It's trying to grow, but it's being cut off all the time. How can it flower and grow leaves and produce fruit if it gets up and gets cut off? It's like wheatgrass. Chop, 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 chop.
Very, very clear. Very clear. And
try and grow a plant over a pot and cut it off all the time. Yeah, it's like that's what we're doing.
We're vacuuming off the shoots, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's really, really clear. It's a vision that's something that we can get behind. Let me just say this, because if there's one kind of a thing that I see that might make people hesitate, because in a way we don't want people always earning interest from us and being right at the edge where we're pay interest, right?
You
But
don't
in
want
another
interest.
way, we think we want interest because we think that someday I can't work and I have to build my portfolio, you know, I have to build somehow my net worth in a way that'll last 10 or 15 years or however long I'm going to live but somehow that can be a part of that
It
community-based
doesn't stop you
caring,
building your
community-based
portfolio.
caring.
It's just who you bring in to capitalize your vision is different. You're choosing the wrong partners to capitalize your vision. You're bringing in people that are going to suck you dry. Hey, come and be part of my vision. I'll give you everything. You know, I'll work twice as much as I need to because you're in the picture. Like if you create a suburb that's based on the wealth never leaves this suburb, man, that's abundant very fast.
Yeah, really.
It's very fast.
Right.
Everyone learns power straight away.
Yeah.
First thing, they learn power structure. They learn to care straight away.
I think we knew it. You know, I think we knew that the wealth never leaves the suburb, but we gave up our possibility to do that for ourselves, and we said, oh well, the industrials will do that. Let's track the big industry here, and then he'll bring wealth in by selling stuff off to other people. And so then we've kind of given away that possibility to create it ourselves and leaned on someone else, and that someone else has done what they've done for their own advantages, not for us. And so somehow it's time to take that back.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great catchphrases that came out in the recent decades was buy local. Right, great. But what are you buying?
Carrots.
You're buying, and you're just perpetuating a cycle which does enhance and support local product, which is very important. But more important is to finance local, because the debt and the suck is coming from somewhere in France right now, right? David, what's Rothschild or something?
Rothschild.
I think it's David Rothschild's running the planet right now. And, you know, he's got a very fine network all over the world of central banks, down through the tax, everything, right down to the finest thing, right? I came here on part paying him tax for the fuel to get here, right? That's where it's at. Like, I paid him money to get to this interview.
So he gets a piece of the action worldwide, right?
Yeah.
So he's little...
if I rode a horse here, man, he wouldn't have been in the picture. But he's in the picture.
He might have sold the horse to you, right? And he'd be selling you oats, right?
Well, the point is obvious that not only have we got to buy local, more importantly, we've got to finance local. And the success of one of the billionaires who got the Nobel Prize is that he worked out microfinance for Indian people, how to do incredible microfinance systems. And he's already there. He's already got the template out there. It's already done. We are sort of called leading the world. We haven't even got empowerment in our local suburb. We can't even microfinance ourselves, which is our empowerment loss there, right there. We've already got centralized structures of care, so we just use them to care for our finances, which is more importantly caring for our children than anything else. So we can finance locally, not just buy local, but we finance local. Second step, we're going to be in abundance very quickly. And then we're reinforcing the local center in which there's a harmonious feedback to the people. Like I've had debts run around here, I've borrowed and lent people money. And I do a lot of exchange. Yeah. I have a little rental car business, and people offer me to exchange. And it's very communicative. It's very cup of tea, how are you, connected. You know, because I don't run it as a corporate mentality. And I can do lots of exchange like that. Everybody can. But it doesn't have to be this clumsy exchange. It can be with the normal currency, the debt instruments that we use every day. But it can be in other ways because it's local. It can be, well, you know, this person's a teacher at the school. They need a house, right? They're going to be teaching here. They're a teacher. They're going to be teaching here for 10 to 20 years. Well, they don't get a wage as big as normal, but they get the house, right? And we can all go and build it and everyone tracks their records or whatever. It doesn't matter. But there's an obvious local community focus through the schools with the parents who care showing up. And microfinancing isn't a hard gig. but it's an important thing to stop the pressure on society from the gangsters and banksters who are manipulating the governments and everything from a centralized world perspective. And the thing is that eventually we have to take over that world perspective and make it holistic, because there is a good thing about centralizing things on a global level. It's a species organization. But until the species is aware that the species can do that as a whole, as the species becomes unified, it will be caring for itself. But the care's got to start somewhere. It's got to start in the people that are in front of you, with the people that are in front of you, and in them. And just as an abstract throw-in to conclude, I'll suggest that the human species has an effect on the planet. Definitely has an effect on the planet. Right? And it can be constructive or destructive, positive or negative. And it can be harmoniously enhancing everything, if we choose that to be, right? And we can have abundance with that. There's no problem. We're just going through a threshold right now of realization that, hey, we're a species and we can have species consciousness. We can have global thinking, centralized agencies, which actually are benefiting everybody rather than sucking everyone dry. But we've got to learn to do that locally. But once we get to that, we'll recognize that the human species is creating light as its end product. That, you know, caterpillars turn into butterflies and they grow wings. Well, humans create light. My suggestion is that humans create light as their butterfly wings. And what light looks like when it's spherical is a star. And my suggestion, just as a throw-in abstract thing, is that when we manage the reverb really well, the reverb gives out light. And it looks like a star. And if we realize that we're in a stellar process, and we're not looking for aliens or whatever, that we're actually creating something unified together, we'll go to an energetic level way beyond our comprehension, and a unified perception together as a species way beyond our possible individual comprehension. And the feeling of that will be magnificent. But only if we manage the reverb.
Helio, far out. I tell you, these visions are really, it's all it takes is a vision to really get behind and to see that the way is simple. And the way is already here, actually. You're set in the community. Just use what's here. And somehow these options have to get on the table. Nobody has to force anyone to do it. And then it's easy. It's so easy to see how you said it, to get it in kick-started, is to start taking the pressure off, right? And then the premise is that it's automatic, that self-organization happens, and we don't have to believe in it, because once we get the pressure off, we can see it in action. It's a local phenomenon, and we can just see it. It's not a end of the rainbow, or it's not life in heaven or the kingdom of heaven on earth. I mean, it is, but it's just here, right now.
And you're not disconnected from it, so you feel the benefit of helping someone else.
Yeah, and actually you open your feelers up, you know, you take off your concepts and your interpretations and all the things we use to separate, you know. If we said they deserve it, or they're stupid, or they're whatever excuse we give, then we don't feel anymore, right? We don't feel any. And so then we can just be there where we already are. And
there's a shift with quantitative physics, quantum physics, to quantum physics, qualitative physics. There's also a shift from quantitative finance to qualitative finance. Right? And if you want to feel good about your financial arrangements, then there's a way for that too. It's not just quantitative, who's got the best deal, who's going to...
Yeah, people do that in a little way because they have investment trusts and stuff that are supposedly investing in green companies or different kind of parameters they use, you know, and you don't usually make as much money. Maybe because, you know, you're not into wild speculation and playing zero-sum games to the best of your ability, but you're trying to add value. And really, I've always wanted to add value. And I never wanted to gamble or make, you know, win or lose. I never wanted to win at gambling either.
But what feels good is a guide. because you can feel the harmony, you can feel the truth, you can feel your way forward. You can feel which financing method is better. You can sell your house to somebody who feels better. You can make a qualitative choice. You don't have to make a quantitative choice all the time. And the qualitative choices need to be keyed in on generating harmony on a long-term basis, because that's what feels really good.
That's killer. That is so novel, really, to our society, because we seem to be locked into quantitative choices and saying, well, it costs less, I have to go there, right? And then I remember when I lived in Italy, and then Americans would be out there, and you'd hear them grumbling that lunch cost $2 more than they thought, because they're so locked into the quantitative choices. And my Italian friend, we'd go spend hundreds of dollars on lunch, and he'd say, I must be rich, I spent so much money. He'd be in the quality of it, right? And I noticed the kind of the difference of that, and it's just not on the table for so many people, just to say, you can live your quality and be it, and you're not a slave to your quantity.
And when you know it's wrong, you just got to say that it's wrong.
Yeah.
When you know it's wrong, just say that it's wrong.
That's the focus of Occupy, then. That should be the focus. Could be. Just to say it's wrong is really more than lining up with a lot of issues.
We all have to stand up and say what's wrong, but more importantly, we have to say what feels good. And this doesn't feel good.
No.
This feels terrible. It's pressure, and it's annihilating and making people's lives difficult. When collaborative financing and microfinancing locally with people who care feels great.
Mm. Helio Matahari. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rich. Beautiful to get a chance to voice this with a receptive audience.
Right. That's you guys.
A reverberating audience.
You're receptive, so I hope we didn't drag too long, or I'll cut this last part out and just give you the key. Thanks so much for coming and watching us, because without you, we'd never learn much, really. We'd just be in our own kind of loop and just saying, well, how do we get out? Or, maybe I should just learn the enjoyment of what's here, and somehow the lessening of anxiety will be a chink in the armor. But just because you're there listening, the quality of the listening equals and directly impinges upon the quality of the sharing. And so then you're all our lovers.
That's right. That's right. It's the choice to listen to this rather than that is significant.
Thank you, Helio.
Thank you.